The session recordings for HoldCoConf 2022 are brought to you by Axial. Axial is a lower middle market deal sourcing platform. To learn more and to start accessing new deal flow today, head to axial.net.
I'm joined on stage here with TRISH Higgins. She and her husband, James, you guys just made a marathon of a drive to get here, which we appreciate.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. If you could help just set the stage, walk us through Chenmark a little bit.
Sure. So the origin story of Chenmark, we started in 2015. The idea was 2014. And myself, my husband, James, who's back there, and my brother-in-law, Palmer, so super weird founding team. We had all sort of done the traditional finance in New York thing, in sort of slightly different realms. So I was at a global macro hedge fund and fund of funds, and James was a currency trader, and Palmer was an equity research analyst. So really nothing to do with buying businesses or operating them. But we had all sort of had an itch to do something a little entrepreneurial, and we sort of in a couple different ways had this idea of buying a business, and had the whole thesis of buying a smaller business at an attractive valuation could be a good investment idea. I did go to business school, and I managed to take 0 search classes while I was there, so kind of sort of a miss on my part. But we thought that would be an interesting thing to do, and from an investment perspective. And so sort of on the side of our normal jobs, we started looking at, biz buy sell and all those things, just to kind of look at, was this a thing? Turns out it was. Is it something we could do on the side? Turns out it's hard to do it on the side. Maybe we could do it close. One person could keep their job, and we could find something close to home in the tri-state area. That didn't work out. And so eventually it was sort of, we committed to all doing it together, and quitting our jobs and trying to find a business to buy, which ended up being a commercial landscaping snow removal company up in Portland, Maine, which is where we live now. And when I say it, our vision from the very beginning was to buy multiple companies, to use the cash flows from the first business to fund the equity checks for the second business, so on and so forth. So to really not rely on external capital to grow, to buy businesses that we as a family would feel comfortable owning for indefinitely. So really not to be focusing on selling businesses, and to be focused on owning businesses that are really sort of steady, durable, probably don't grow a lot, but have very sort of durable demand and generate free cash flow. And that has been our vision since the very beginning. And sort of loosely formed, sort of in the vision, sort of in the distance. And we kind of interestingly have a lot of things have changed, but that vision has really stayed the same. And so fast forward for today, we own 9 businesses, sort of headquartered in Maine, as I mentioned, but we're sort of throughout New England. We have a business in Tennessee and in Florida, and then 2 in Western Canada. So that's where we are today.
When you guys first started off, I agree that it's an interesting team. Was that the original, hey, we're all going to do this right now? Yeah,
so yes, which is weird, I know. So let's see. James and I had very randomly worked together. So we met in college, and we were dating, we were living together. And he came to our holiday party, and he sat next to my boss, and I don't know what happened at the dinner, because the next day my boss was like, I really like James, can I hire him to join the team? And I was like, oh my gosh, sure. And so we ended up working together for a little over a year, which honestly was wonderful. And we, what wasn't really on our radar beforehand, but we ended up having I think, a good complementary skill set, as well as when you're working, finance in New York, you like have no personal life. So I got to like see him, so that was nice. And it was sort of the spark of like, hey, this was great. It would be awesome to be able to do this again at some point in the future. And then where does Palmer fit into it? So when Palmer had been working, and he had his lease was up in Boston. He didn't know if he wanted to stay with his employer. So he had been traveling a lot. So he didn't renew his lease, and he just moved in with us because we had a spare bedroom. And so we happened to all be living together for probably like six-ish months when the idea came up. And I don't know, it worked. A lot of people were very sort of apprehensive of the idea and like really warned us sort of against working with family and all that sort of stuff. And when we first started, we had, I think, some conversations about ground rules and how we work together. But since then, it's been really wonderful, and I really can't imagine working with anybody else. It's been great.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I'm not just saying that because one partner's here.
Yeah, sure. We'll pin you down later. One of the things that we're going to get to the true topic, which is go faster or go slow, and I'm really excited for that. But one of my favorite things about you talking about this space is that you are sort of brutally honest about what it's really like to run a holdco. And I think that you guys live it out every day. You're not just allocators, you're operators. Can you walk through that transition a little bit?
Sure. So, when we started, I feel like I can be honest because sometimes when people call me up, it's like I'm talking to myself from like 5 or 10 years ago. And, I think a lot of people have this sort of romantic notion of a holding company / mini private equity, and it's very like glamorous, and I'm just gonna like sit and like do analysis like in my Excel and read the newspaper and like books and contemplate things. And like there is a portion, a very small portion of our lives that are like that. But I think the reality is, maybe once you achieve a certain scale, that could be the reality. But when you're working with smaller businesses, the value is coming from the businesses themselves. And that, means that you have to know what's going on in the businesses. And, sort of, I was talking just before now, is that I think when you come from a certain background and professional experience, sort of everyone's generally speaking operating from the same playbook. And when you go into the world of small business, there are a lot of different playbooks people are operating from, and some of them, from my perspective, are highly irrational and difficult to sort of figure out and navigate. And so I think that like if you want to get involved in sort of a search fund or micro PE or holdco or whatever you want to flavor suits your personality, I think you have to be prepared for it to be sort of blocking and tackling and like a full contact sport. If you have this vision of you being sort of like this like mini like Warren Buffett, like sitting in your office, like eating peanut brittle and reading 10Ks, like that's just not what it is. And so I think you have to enjoy sort of the messiness that comes with the reality of an operating business and feel like comfortable with like a lack of information and crazy people and disappointing clients and like all these things. And you have to really enjoy that world for it to be something you want to do. Because otherwise I think you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, I think that's great. And also, you don't just read 10Ks all day? I thought that's what we all did.
Yeah.
All right, let's dive into go faster, go slow. I think it's interesting. You and I first talked on this topic, and I'm just going to tee this up with, when you presented this topic, I thought you were going in the opposite direction, because this is sort of the origin that I know of Chenmark is a lot of deals in landscaping quickly. So I thought you were like, yeah, go fast, it's going to be great, and you ended up taking the opposite. So walk us through that.
You're right. So again, I think it depends on your reference point, what is fast, what is slow. So our perspective is that we've gone slow. And I think part of that is, first of all, is your capital source. So we were initially funded with our own capital and some friends and family capital for our first deal. And it has always been a debate, less so now, but particularly for the first couple of years of, hey, there's an opportunity here. We see something. We think we can capitalize it. We're positioned to take advantage of this market opportunity. And if we were to work with external capital providers, we could go significantly faster. And wouldn't that be cool? Versus if we, sort of stick with our original plan, which is, no/limited external capital, certainly not like growth capital. Fund, use the cash flows from the business to fund the next deal, so on and so forth. First of all, we would end up retaining ownership, and we also would sort of be in control of our own destiny. And so we have had those conversations many times. We've had preliminary conversations with, people who, want to give us money, which is like always flattering and like nice for your ego to talk to people like that. And then you read legal documents and you're like, oh, they don't like me that much. So we've decided to stay internally funded. And so we can only really grow as fast as well as our companies are doing. And, we did do a flurry of landscape acquisitions at the beginning, mostly because they came to us. It was not a strategy. That was not part of the plan. It just was, we happened to buy one, and then all these other ones just very local, like in our general area, like came out of the woodwork, and like they were good deals, and we sort of had to stretch to make those work. But then, as we've talked about before, we did a bunch of acquisitions, but then basically like for 2 to 3 years, we did nothing. And like all we really, from a deal perspective. So from an external perspective, everybody asks, like the thing people like to talk is like, how many companies do you have? Like why that's a good indicator of success is unclear to me, because like you could own one, like I could own Apple, that's one company. I could rather own Apple than like Chenmark, right? So from an external perspective, everyone asks how many companies do you have? That number stays the same for, a couple of years, and then you get the awkward sort of like pause, like, oh, when you're talking to people in conversation. And then people always want to ask like, oh, how many deals have you done lately? Like that's the metric, right? And then when you haven't done any deals, you get also that sort of like, oh, well, how are the kids? And so, from an external perspective, we felt like we were going painfully slow because the market opportunity was still out there, but we'd done a bunch of acquisitions, and we needed to figure out like what we were doing. Like it wasn't a mess, it just like wasn't organized. Like we didn't really have a mental model for like what are we doing and what are the companies doing, and like, are we centralized versus not decentralized? Like, the scale that Connor talked about in the last session, like, are you a 1 or a 10? Like, we went from like a 1 to a 10 to a 7 to a 2, like in one day, And so we realized like we really needed to take some time away from the deal side of things and away from the growth of the company side of things. And so instead of focusing on growth, really just focus on like, hey, we've got this sort of like first step on this long journey we want to go down. Like, let's spend some time to get this stuff organized. And it felt really slow and frustrating to really not focus on acquisitions or organic growth for, a couple of years. And then as some of that stuff has started to gel, we felt more comfortable to say, hey, now we're able to go out and do some more acquisitions. So in the past sort of 12 months, we've been able to pick up the pace of growth again. But if you were to talk to James Palmer or I, we all feel like hey, the fact that we have sort of taken our time to figure out sort of the sort of have good and bad experiences owning businesses, figure out what works for us, what doesn't, translate that into some systems and governance structures and all of that sort of stuff, to translate that sort of into the ways of working of Chenmark, and then allowing ourselves to grow from there, from our perspective, has been a slow path, but it's been a valuable path.
Do you think some of the pace, this is sort of a sideline back to the original, but it just got me thinking about this. You each have an operational role in one of your verticals, right?
Not technically, not James.
Okay.
Yep.
Except for James. Sorry, James.
Yeah.
But does that help dictate pace too? Like if I was actively working in a business that really helps like throttle what I'm able to do, which is probably why I'm helping in one of our companies right now.
So yeah, in the businesses that Palmer and I have run, those have done well. And that has been very valuable for us. Given our professional backgrounds, we had no operating experience. So then if we own these businesses and we go in and we say, whatever, a small example, hey, you pay people weekly. Like if you paid people every 2 weeks, that might help with working capital if you're in like a very seasonal cash constrained business, like a small example. Or, hey, if you have a contract that is due, it's billed on the 1st, is due on the 30th. If you were to send it out before the 1st, people might pay you whatever 5 days earlier, something like that. So like very small little operational boring tweaks, which overall added up can result, as you know, in a successful business if you are thinking about all those small little tweaks all the time. So I could have had all of those ideas, but if I am suggesting them or talking to somebody who's running a business, and I've never actually done them myself, it's sort of like, yeah, that's nice, right? But when I've actually had the lived experience of, like I increased prices and then some people were mad and then guess what? They paid and now they're not, right? Like, and now I have more money in my bank account and they have less in theirs. That's great. And so, but being able to have that experience ourselves has, I think, allowed us to have more credibility, like as a leadership group with like the rest of the team. So that's been great. But on the growth thing, it became very clear that like James Palmer and I cannot run all of our businesses at a certain point. And so sort of figuring out the talent component was like a key element to us figuring out how to be able to grow faster again.
Did you figure that out in that 2 to 3 years, or has that been like a gradual progression?
I would say that, well, I mean, have we figured it out?
Did you totally figure it out?
I don't know, but we have, ask me, I don't know, 10 years, I'll tell you if it worked, but we have some ideas. And so I would say a couple years ago, it became clear that like, hey, we have these businesses. Two things became clear. Hey, if we want to buy another business, we may need somebody to run it, and we don't know anybody who's going to run it. Through a series of very unfortunate events, we hired some people to run our businesses that were mistakes. And so we realized like, hey, it's not a great idea to just hire somebody you don't know to run your business, which is kind of obvious. And so we realized like we need to be hiring people that like we know, who are part of our like our culture and understand what our values and goals are. We can't be those people. And those people aren't necessarily like already in the businesses that we have. So we had to kind of like through some trial and error kind of create our own like recruiting program that sounds like a lot of, basically people who have structures like us have to do is, how do you kind of attract people who want to be operators? And so I think, it's not like we need to hire 100 people, right? Like we're hiring like a handful of people. sort of like a constant recruiting cycle for people who want to come in and be operators. And so far, like that program has worked pretty well for us.
So you took 2 to 3 years to digest after, how many deals was it?
5.
You got back to it. Did you continue sort of taking that hiatus to digest after sort of each flurry, or how did the pace change?
So I'd say we did 5. I'm gonna get the numbers, like the specifics wrong here, but 5 in like the first 2 to 3 years, which was a lot, and then we basically stopped, and then we kind of picked it up basically like a year ago, or yeah, in the past maybe 9 months, we've bought 3 companies. So we've picked up pace again, but it doesn't feel like the growth feels more manageable now because we have more things thought through. So I wouldn't say like we've done these 3 deals and now we're going to take another 2 years to digest them. I think that like the cycle rate of sort of digesting the deals, I think is faster now. And I mean, we're in a way like we are constrained because like we used all the money we had to buy those companies. So like even if I wanted to buy 3 more companies like today, I can't. I have to wait for all those companies to generate cash, and then like towards the end of this year we'll have more cash to go out and do it again. So in a way, like things kind of ebb and flow a little bit for us, which I think is from my like inexperienced operations perspective, is a wonderful thing. Because if we had, sort of just a huge pool of capital available, we might be focusing right now on doing deals when we haven't sort of like fully integrated the ones that we have just done. So I think for us, that's a benefit of being internally funded, because it sort of forces you to actually like repot essentially after you've done a series of deals.
You really like softballed me into the thing that I wanted to talk about next.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you. You must be reading the notes. And that was just the internal funding engine. So you have to fill the pot.
Yep.
You have to cut equity checks. How does this look for you guys? And how do you use it to help control your pace?
Can you clarify the question a little bit?
I guess roughly, the thesis worked.
Yeah.
So you decided not to raise external capital. You decided to fund off your cash flow, which
Yep.
I think is great. I think that's wonderful. But I think the other decision that's sort of unspoken here is how much you're putting into deals. And you don't need to be specific, but it's probably more than like a typical LBO. Like we're just going to go shotgun 12 deals.
Okay, so your first question I could have gone like 10 different ways on, so I just want to make sure. So we've sort of, we've made everything up, but we've sort of said like, let's say we buy a $1 million EBITDA company for 4 times. We'll put in $2 million of equity, get $2 million of debt, a mixture of seller financing and bank debt. So just like very simple back of the envelope stuff. But, when I talk to my private equity friends, like that's very over equitized. But small businesses, they're volatile. We're risking essentially our own capital. So I would say that our general risk tolerance has been lower than I think it would be if I was investing other people's money, because like I just don't care as much about other people's money. And so so at the very beginning, that was essentially the structure of it, or like our thought process behind it. As we've grown, that's been our sort of structure for like the holding company overall debt metrics. And so as we grow, we can actually kind of like grow, I think, a little bit faster because we have sort of, we're constantly amortizing debt. As well as we've also paid off a lot of like prepaid debt when we're able to. And so we're right now sort of well under our sort of debt target, I guess. So theoretically, we have large amount of debt capacity right now. So I think we probably, if we wanted to, could do the next, couple of deals like with all debt and still be under our like global debt sort of metrics. We still probably won't do that because we're still conservative and all those sorts of things. But in theory, the nice thing about sort of doing the internally funded thing and retaining the ownership of it is that, you kind of have to slog it out for the first however many years. But once you get to a certain period in time and your companies are generating enough cash, you have the ability to like go even faster. And sort of which you model it out, which, we did when we first started and like haven't looked at it since. But like other than just being like, it seems to be working, like it's an ASIC, it accelerates basically.
So I want to talk about that part for a second, because so far it's been mainly advocating, hey, let's be patient. Disciplined really is probably the best word for this, which I think is great. How are you preparing for, let's say, 2 or 3 years from now? For it to just naturally accelerate because the cash is so great. So
I would say that we are very lucky because James back there is very good at thinking about this, more so than Palmer and I are, who are much more like what's happening right now, which is why like Palmer and I have like gravitated towards like the operational roles, and he's stayed much more of like a global thinker, which we need both of those. And so I think that when we first started, we really, as I mentioned, we didn't go into this saying like, we're just going to buy whatever, 1 company or 3 companies. Like we've gone into this thinking like, we want to have a mindset where we could own like 100 companies or a couple hundred, like that has been our mindset from the very beginning, which sounds like ludicrous when you're like out shoveling snow at like 2 a.m. to help out the guys. But like, that is like the mindset. And so, like obviously things will have to change, but I think we have been, I really have to give James the credit here, because James has been very deliberate about us thinking about the mechanisms and the systems that we have in place right now. I think like when it comes to like the interaction between the HoldCo and the companies and incentive structures and stuff, I think all of that will scale very well. Like there's no reason what we have with 9 companies won't work with 30. And so we're spending a lot of time and resources in making sure that we're sort of set up to responsibly manage like a decentralized portfolio of small businesses. And so a lot of that work has like happened a couple years ago. And like the reason why onboarding 3 companies now for us, like honestly, like it just hasn't been that hard, is because of the work that happened a couple years ago. And I think we can like, that's just going to keep building, because I think we've got some good building blocks in place.
I want to talk, the point of this conversation isn't shared services, but now that we've touched on it, I feel like a lot of people would comment if I didn't bring it up.
Sure.
Can you walk us through what your current either HoldCo team or shared services looks like? Because I know it's lean, and I think that's interesting.
Yes. So going back to kind of like first principles, like we think of ourselves, so Chenmark we think of as like we think there's like a Venn diagram, and it's like small business owners who want to like retire, and then it's operators, like people who want operational roles. And for us, that's usually a person who is sort of has had maybe a traditional job, maybe has some family exposure to family business, wants to do something like, hands-on, have an impact, lead a small group of people, all that sort of stuff. And then capital is the third part of the Venn diagram, which is, what we're providing. And Chenmark like lives in the middle of that Venn diagram. And that's like, I think of Chenmark as a matchmaking business. Like we're matching like businesses with operators and capital, basically. And so what does that have to do with shared services? A key component is the operators. And the operators that we're trying to attract are not, they want to have autonomy and independence. And that's sort of what we're selling. And I think I was talking to you again, like I've talked to people who are like, oh, like I ran this division and I had full P&L responsibility, but like I didn't have to recruit people and I didn't have to determine pay rates and I didn't have to collect AP or AR and I didn't have to pay any AP. I'm like, well, that's not really like full P&L responsibility. And so the people that we want to come work for us like want to basically run their own thing. And so our shared services offering, I think, has to be aligned with what, people who are running our businesses want. And so we have basically some mandated things. So, your financials have to be done on an accrual basis in a timely and accurate manner, which I don't think is a big ask, but, can be. And they have to be able to export into Excel and sent to us. And we'll do the aggregation and look at our fancy charts that nobody else really cares about, as far as I can tell. So basically we have a cash management dashboard. So like that stuff all happens in the business. But those are requirements. From a shared service perspective, we have 2 tech guys. I'll tell you who I have first and then why we have them. We have 2 tech guys. We have a recruiter, and we have a marketer, and that's it. And the reason that we have the tech guys is that we observe, most cybercrime happens in small business. We don't want to like have to pay $100,000 in Bitcoin to like some guy in Serbia. And so we realized very early on that small businesses all tend to work with sort of their local MSP, if you think of the quadrant of sort of like, I don't know, cost and like value of service, they're in like the bottom, they're in the worst quadrant, like high cost, low value, usually. Bottom right. And so we happened through just some personal relationships, happened to know somebody who was like looking for a career change. We couldn't really afford him, but like he was interested in like working with small businesses. So we said, hey, he came on and has been working on like the cyber sort of security component of all of our businesses and like managing all of the devices and whatnot. And the second guy sort of is like a IT like helper guy. So if we buy a business, like he's on there day one, like getting everything set up from a tech security perspective. And then they are also working on development. So most of the small businesses that we work with are in industries that tend to have like a very outdated, like not great ERP system. And a lot of the work that our guy does essentially is create like a layer on top of like random niche industry software to like be able to generate like reporting or data that is useful for our team. So like an example would be in our lawn care business, there's like one ERP, Real Green is like the big one in the industry. Very, very difficult to get usable reports and things like information out of it. So our guy, Dave, who's wonderful, he like sort of figured out like the information you could get out of Real Green and tied it in with some other sort of operational metrics so that now the team can get like a budgeted sort of production versus actual report by technician by day. So like on a daily basis, they have a couple different branches, but like every branch can look at like, hey, whatever, Alex was supposed to produce this amount today and he produced that amount. And they can see it all visually like on their tablet. So like he's doing that sort of stuff, which I think in the small business space, we're working with businesses that are, sort of, real world operational, like real businesses. They're not tech businesses, but you can gain a competitive advantage if you're thinking a little differently from the competition, and saying like, hey, how can we use technology in this small business to gain a competitive advantage? So that has been a very good, a very value added hire for us. The tech security component of that is like mandatory for our businesses. The development is a ticketing system, and it's sort of use it or don't use it. And we're not going to force anything on people, but if they want to engage, Dave's here to help. And I think that part of that is sort of sharing information. So when our CEOs get together, which we do on a monthly basis, one person might be talking about, hey, I just had Dave, help me with this project. And Dave might bring in other people to help him if it's a particularly big project, but he'll lead it all. And sort of our philosophy is sort of kind of like free markets-esque, which is like, hey, like the company that uses the resources that are available to them will perform better, and other people will see that and try to use it. And if they don't see it, probably their companies aren't going to do as well, which is sort of played out in like the little Chenmark ecosystem. And so then recruiting, honestly, was just sort of like we were frustrated hire, because every company would list sort of staffing as their number one headache. But then like you talk to the landscaper guys about it, and like they all like have 3 mechanics on staff. It's unclear what they all do, and like 0 recruiting or HR staff. They're focused on like solving what they say is their biggest problem. And I think that we were very fortunate that like we went to schools and we're in professions where like, Goldman Sachs has like amazing recruiting, like Google has amazing recruiting. Like those jobs and the people who are doing them and the systems they have are incredible to like attract talent. And so what we said is like, hey, like we can see how recruiting could add a lot of value to our small businesses, but some people in the businesses have never seen that in action. So like we're going to invest some of basically our own like time and capital to hire a recruiter that's going to sit at the HoldCo level and then like work with all of our businesses to recruit talent. And that has been a very good hire. Honestly, it's made a huge difference in a lot of our businesses. It's been great. And then the final one is marketing. That was sort of something that we felt like, again, a lot of our companies were working with external marketing, small local marketing firms, high cost, questionable value. So we thought if we brought some expertise in-house, people might be able to leverage that, as well as none of us are marketers. And like, I don't really even know how to navigate like choosing an agency and like what's good, what's bad, and how do I evaluate how well these Google ads are doing. Like I don't speak that language. We needed somebody to kind of be our guide there. We hired somebody almost 2 years ago now, and he's been great as well. But our sort of philosophy again is to say, here are these people, this is what they do. And if you would like to use them, like talk to them and figure out, how to work together. It's not to say like, hey, like knock, knock, company in Tennessee, like Trish from HQ calling, here's Jamie, you have to use him. Like that's not our approach.
I appreciate you sharing that. With the sort of last topic that I want to cover, then we're going to open it up for some questions. This is going back to probably very early in the conversation, and it was talking about scorecard, which has been a common theme throughout this conference. Like, how do we measure what we're doing? And the common measurement is how many companies do you have and how many deals have you done recently, which obviously applies some peer pressure. So how do you handle that? Like, what is your scorecard, and then how do you handle the peer pressure?
Well, so in general, like I'm not sure peer pressure is a bad thing, because I think that it helps avoid complacency, which I think is the biggest risk to Chenmark. Is sort of, hey, whatever, we've got 9 companies, like things seem to be going pretty well, like let's just kick it into neutral and like hang out. But That's not really what we want, and it's also what the people we've attracted to work with us, that's not really what they want either. So picking your head up and looking at what other people are doing and achieving can be a powerful external motivator if one is needed. In terms of scorecard, our sort of metric is free cash flow. That's like our holy grail. So we're certainly looking at, ideally that number goes up every year, not down. And it's interesting because we don't have any we want to get to X number. Like none of us really think like that. It's more like, isn't it cool to it's basically just to keep doing what we're doing, buy more businesses, generate cash, buy more businesses, do it over and over and over again. So we don't really have a metric of or score, sort of a we've made it that. We don't really think like that. But it's sort of the two things are free cash flow goes up every year, and the other thing is that all of our companies are free cash flow positive. Because we certainly have had some years where some companies suck and are negative free cash flow, but the other ones are doing well. And so ideally we live in a world where all of our companies are positive contributors, and the number is going up year on year. But then beyond that, we really don't have, personally, I want to be home 90% of the nights to put my kids to bed. That's my other scorecard. That's a good one.
I appreciate you answering that. We have a few minutes for questions, so who would like to ask Trish something?
Do you mind describing, you mentioned the program to operators earlier, do you mind describing that?
Sure. It's not so we get people from all over the place. So we're looking for people who eventually want to be operators, but they first have to come to Maine and work with us, in person for a period of time so we get to know them and their analytical capabilities. Then they go work in an operating business as a branch manager, salesperson, something like that. And then that's the pool of people that we will tap to run the next business. And if none of those people want to run a business, we'll just pass on it. That's our only source of operational talent. Because we're confident in those people and we know them and we trust them. But where do those people come from? It is a mix of, it's basically just doing stuff this is really not a great target audience, but doing stuff like this, being on podcasts, talking at Search Fund. The Search Fund community is a very good community to target, just because they're people who are interested in operating businesses. I think that the only downside to the Search Fund community is business school students can be very high maintenance. I speak for this as a business school student myself. Sort of your stock price is the highest right when you're graduating. You're just going to go down from there. Everyone thinks they're going to be the next whoever. And so I think something we have not really experimented with is targeting sort of undergraduate business programs and recruiting directly from there. Because I think a lot of people want to be operators, but there aren't great paths for them to know how to get there. And so we've had a couple of early successes with sort of hiring people right out of business programs at the undergraduate level. First of all, they're half the price, if not more, of business school kids. And you can give them a couple years to kind of grow in operating roles. But why can't you give operational control to a small landscape business to a 25-year-old? The guy who started it when he was 19, you got controls in place, the person. It's not a complicated business. And we're giving people an opportunity to sort of step up and see what they can do. So that'll probably be a path for us to target more. But it's that sort of coming out of school. We get a lot of disaffected investment banker people, but they usually cost too much, so we don't hire them. Yeah, so like before I was in this world, we sort of worked in the investment world where sort of, uncorrelated assets are great. And so in the early days, at the beginning, like we were pretty much all landscaping. And so it was something that we sort of, do we want to lean into the landscaping space more and be like a landscaping company? Because there certainly was and still is an opportunity to do that. Evaluations in the landscaping space, from our perspective, have gotten too high for us. So we sort of like bowed out of that race. I'm not sure, what business are you in? Okay. So you're a little different. From our perspective, what's amazing in landscaping is like the weather patterns make a huge difference, particularly in snow. So even though we're in the same industry, like we can have a wide range of outcomes between Portland, Maine, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Cape Cod. Even in that very small geographic region, we can have very different performance based on weather patterns. So interestingly, like the outcomes for us, like actually in landscaping, were diversified because like it depended on weather patterns, which is like kind of crazy, but it just was what it was. But we did want to get away from it in a way, and sort of we were always interested in like owning other things, and so landscaping led to lawn care. Which is, which leads to tick and mosquito control, which leads to maybe like equipment, like providers, and so it kind of like can ebb and flow. But the other thing is now like we're really good, I think, at evaluating landscape businesses. So if that's an advantage that you have from being in it, like you might see something other people don't. So to be honest, I feel like we may have like been too theoretically concerned about diversification like early on, when like honestly like the first couple like could still be probably all telecom and like you'd be fine. Yes, well, they're 3 and 6, so we'll see. Totally figured out. So we would, when we're thinking about Chenmark, we're thinking about something that the next generation can inherit, if that's something they want to do. So, in an ideal world, like, the kids would love being involved in the family business, and we'd be able to give them like the best summer internships ever. And then they'd like go off to some sort of job where like they learned all sorts of like other like professionalized things, but then they come home to like the mothership and learn under us, and gradually we'd have a graceful transition of power. And they'd visit me, and so like, that'd be great. And that's how we think about it. But, it might not happen. I don't know. They might be like comedians or something. Who knows? But it is how that mindset is how we're thinking about setting it up. And so I think that it's sort of a mindset thing, more than whether it might actually happen or not, because it's a long-term mindset. Sure. So, let me think about this. It's a good question. Well, one is just a feeling of like, oh, there's just shit's going wrong everywhere, and like and a big thing was when we felt like we wanted to head in this direction, and very clearly decisions were being made in the portfolio companies that did not align with the way we wanted to go. So we had some leaders at the time who, we had one of our leaders was very focused on maximizing revenue, but like didn't seem to care at all about profits. And so, first of all, we clearly made like the wrong hire there. The person was just like wired differently. Like how we missed that, I don't know, it became pretty obvious like pretty soon. And when we're saying like these are our values, but it seems like the things that are happening in the companies like don't align with those things. And so when you have like numerous of those examples going on, you have to say like, first of all, it's not just like, we can't just be like, well, want that one guy. Like that's the problem. Like the problem was that we hadn't created the environment, the incentive structures, the systems, like all of these sorts of things, the recruiting, hiring, training processes for our leadership team. We hadn't created like the ecosystem for people to perform in the way we wanted them to perform. And so instead of it just being like, well, that guy, like they all suck, like let's fire them, which happened in some situations, it was more like it was a general feeling of not being aligned. And I feel like if anybody has been in that situation, you kind of like know it. And we just felt like if we keep doing acquisitions, like without having like a cohesive sort of culture and structure, like this could just all fall apart. And that is just like not a feeling that I have now, but it is certainly a feeling that we all had, like a general sense of unease at all times, that like things were just not sort of that things just felt chaotic more than they should have. Yes, okay, so question 2, I'm gonna defer to our breakout session. Question 1 is what do we own, in case people didn't hear it. So we own, let's see if I can get this right, 3 landscape businesses. So that's commercial and some very high-end residential landscaping and snow removal businesses in New England. They're run separately, even though they're in the same industry. They're actually quite different businesses from a branding perspective. We own 1 lawn care tick and mosquito control business, which is broadly speaking in the green space, but also a very different company. We own 2 boat tour businesses, 1 in Maine and 1 in Florida. We own a fruit tree farm in Tennessee. We own a frozen dough manufacturing company in Western Canada, as well as a network of paint distributors in Western Canada. I think that's 9. Yeah. It's random.
It's an interesting portfolio.
And then, what was your last question? Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, no, the second question was the capital allocation one. The third, so one thing that we learned early on from our hedge fund days was this notion of like the right to take risk. And so like the hedge fund manager that I was working for, he sort of looked at it as like, we're going to hit singles until we're up a certain amount, let's say 10 or 15% on the year. And then like once we've hit singles, like then we can start taking bigger bets because like we've built up a cushion. And so like the way we're going to get outsized returns is not to go from like 0 to 40% with a bunch of like wild bets. We're going to like build it up. And so we have like a baseline of returns and then we're going to take more risk. And so he basically, the way he talked about it all the time was like, we earn the right to take risk, which I don't know if that's the right way to manage like a hedge fund, but it had an impact on me, and he has done really well for himself, so it worked for him. But I think it really does work from a business perspective. So we say that to our team all the time, and the way it plays out in a small business setting is like hey, you know what? Like, yeah, maybe there's an ability to do like 5 tuck-ins this year, or to open a new branch, or to grow a ton, or whatever. But like, you can't close your months on time, so like, no. Or like you have crazy turnover because like it seems like you're doing a terrible job at onboarding people properly, or like it seems like you're having a lot of issues where with your estimates, and like some of your estimating team seems to be doing like a great job, but then like half of your jobs are losing money, or like maybe you don't even know like which part of your business is making money. And so we like pretty like hammer our people on like, you need to get like basically get your shit in order, right? Like get the basics of your business running well. Get a solid team that's helping you, get all of these things in place, build a solid foundation, right? And then focus on growing. Because if you do it too fast, like it's all just gonna fall apart. And like, we're not in a rush. We can take a year or two to like do things right. And then you can grow and it'll be better. It won't be as stressful. It'll be more sustainable. It'll be all these things. But like, you can't, taking time to just stop and figure out what you've got and not focus on growth, but like build a solid foundation will pay off like 10 times down the road. And so we're a big fan of that. And if any of our people say they need to do that in their businesses, like we have no problem. Like we are 100% supportive of that. And we would be not fans of people growing like basically like too fast, too furious. It's like not the Chenmark thing. Somebody back there like that.
All right, we've got time for one more.
Yeah. So with the caveat that what we have now might change in the future, but what we have right now is that we are trying to build sort of a one team, one dream mentality. And so I think if somebody's joining Chenmark in whatever snow removal company, I think we're trying to make it be that they're not part of just that one company. They're part of a team of businesses, and they have opportunity across the portfolio, as well as just a community of people. So our structure, our incentive structure has to reflect that goal. And so people are compensated on, they get a cut of the free cash flow of their business that is paid out in cash. And it's cash because some people just want cash. And then let's say you earn $100 in your free cash flow bonus. And annually, we have basically, it's very similar to the last session, but we basically make a market. So we have a framework for valuing Chenmark Holdings stock. And so if you know what our earnings are, you'll know what our share price is. We say, hey, this is a buy-sell window. This is the stock of Chenmark. This is the price, whatever. Let's say it's $10 this year. And people can use their $100 that they made in their free cash flow. They can use up to that amount to buy stock. So you don't have to buy stock. You could buy up to $100. You could buy $2, whatever. So in the window that we have annually, people submit buy and sell orders, and we balance the book. If there are more sell orders than buy orders, then we have the ability to the company has the ability to buy back those shares. But we also have the ability to turn it into a multi-year note, so we could pay people out over time. So we didn't have like liquidity issues or anything like that. But so far, it's been a good mechanism to get basically everybody on the same page and create more of a team environment, because a lot of these small businesses we're involved in, the magic happens in those sort of like nitty-gritty operational details and stuff. And the more that you can share, like, hey, it's kind of incredible, frozen dough manufacturing business has kind of like a cool pay structure, like that's worked well for them. He is enthusiastic about sharing that with the other CEOs and saying like, hey, there's no reason you're struggling. Like this could work there. Let me send you all my materials. My HR person will talk your HR person through it. Blah 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 blah. And so it's, I think, having people own equity across the company has helped facilitate sharing of information and camaraderie, as well as kind of helping people when they're down, because everybody's invested in getting the back up on their feet and then celebrating wins as well. So, but the structure itself is quite simple.
This was incredible. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.